Everything's been going. The leftover business. I'm sorry that. No, I'm really glad that you got to listen to Mike last week. I'm sure he was going to really beef up the lesson from what I gave you, so I hope you got enough to get.
We just about finished the whole book.
Did you?
Yeah.
Oh, well, let's just move on to
Let's
Latin.
full. That we got out of my city.
I know, Mike's that kind of teacher. I understand.
Full of it.
Okay, this week, I wanted to show you, y'all seen those memes or those pictures where they say he had one job. Okay. Well, I wanted to share some of those with you. All right, come on. There we go. He had one job. He had one job. That one took place over a series of weeks, they said. Or that one.
You saw
9 days a week. I like that one. And then there's that one. That was great.
You also did the rest of that wall after I had the from.
And then my personal favorite. And you can't see, I just now saw it. The city is over here on this side of the wall.
That you just call it colored architecture.
So what were you thinking before the city?
I just thought it just said haulage of, like they covered the sea with a wall or something.
Unfortunately, not very close to the stop sign, that was just a Walmart.
Yeah,
Not that picture, but it's.
but one like it.
Yeah.
What do you do? What's your typical response when you fail at something? I imagine we could get probably all four of these responses from you if we polled everybody. I hate it. I hate myself. I'll never be good at anything. Is that what your response is when you fail at something? Or it's their fault. They're to blame for this failure. It's always somebody else's fault. It wasn't me. Or what do you mean I failed? I didn't fail. I meant to do it that way. Heard that one too, huh? Or is it if at first you don't succeed, try again? You know, as Thomas Edison, as he was perfecting the incandescent light bulb, he's credited with saying, I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work. What is the proper attitude toward when we fail? And especially whenever that failure comes about because of sin in our lives of some kind. The better response, of course, is to turn our eyes upward and ask, what can God teach me through this failure? Now, I worded that on purpose because what some people will say is, what is God trying to teach me through this failure? Now, if you ask it that way, what is the implication that that person has? What is God trying to teach me through this failure?
God's fault that it failed.
It's God's fault. He's the one that caused it. And I'm not going to say that God doesn't thwart some of our efforts at times so that we can learn something, but we got to be careful about always attributing to God our failure. What can God teach me through this failure that I've experienced? That's the question the people in the Old Testament, God's people in the Old Testament, should have asked over and over again, but they refused. That is not how they treated their failure, or even at times acknowledged their failure.
You gotta realize you failed before you start.
Yeah. And how many times have we noticed, even in the book of Jeremiah, what have we done? We haven't done what you said. Can't believe you're accusing us of this.
Exactly. You haven't done anything else.
So we've got two more object lessons that we're going to talk about in this lesson. We mentioned it last time. Object lessons are these generally very simple and intended lessons to give a short but significant message. And God has these two that deal specifically with failure. How do you handle this failure? How do you respond to it properly? And so the questions are, what was it that God wanted Judah to learn? How did God want them to respond? And how can his demonstrations hit home with us? How can they help us? What do we need to learn from our own failures in life? Like what John Wooden said. He said, Wooden, the basketball coach, he says, failure isn't fatal, but failure to change might be. Let's open up here, Jeremiah 18. Get this thing back behind us. I'll keep looking back. Jeremiah 18, and notice how it starts out. So somebody there, read Jeremiah 18, the first 4 verses.
This is the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord. Go down to the potter's house, and there I will give you my message. So I went down to the potter's house, and I saw him working at the wheel. But the pot he was shaping from the clay was marred in his hands. So the potter formed it into another pot, shaping it as seemed best to him.
Now, we don't know exactly where these events took place. Whenever you put these 2 object lessons together, it's more than likely that it took place somewhere in the southern part of Judah. And the second story will give us more of the reason why that probably was the case. But what he talks about here is he goes to this potter's house, and he notices this potter who is making a pot. It would have been a very familiar sight for them. They were, their vessels that they used in the house. They were made of wood or made of clay. And so potters had very important jobs. They had very significant jobs. They had jobs that people would have been very familiar with. So God tells Jeremiah, you go down, see this potter working at his wheel. Now, there was something, though, that he mentions about this potter. And I just, it's one of these videos where you just kind of have to sit there and watch it because it's very fascinating what the potter here does. He mentions it in this passage. He says, I went down to the potter's house and I saw him working at the wheel, but the pot he was shaping from the clay was marred in his hands. So the potter formed it into another pot, shaping it as seemed best to him. What would make a clay pot that he's working on become marred? Is it something that the potter did? Is it something, a problem that the potter had? Did he make mistakes in the way he was making the pot? He sneezed just the wrong time. Now, they knew from making pottery that the clay that the potter worked with could sometimes be marred. It could be because there was too much, the clay had become too wet and collapsed under its own weight, or maybe it was off center on the wheel and so it would fly off the wheel because it wasn't in the right spot. Could be that air bubbles had gotten into the clay and it can ruin a piece. There's many other factors that could affect this clay as it's trying to be molded into the pot. Now, I like the way that the New English translation translates verse 4. And I really had a hard time finding other translations that will do this, but they noticed that in the Hebrew, the verse that says the pot he was shaping from the clay was marred in his hands, that really it ought to start out with something like, now and then there would be something wrong with the pot. The language of the verb in that verse is one of repeated action. It'd be like saying something like, whenever there would be something wrong with the pot. So it wasn't a question of, here every once in a while, this clay that he's working with would be marred, and so he'd have a hard time working with this pot. He would start over again. The language of it is, this is a regular occurrence. Over and over again, he's working with the clay, and whenever the clay got marred, then he would start over again. The word for marred, it's the same word in chapter 13 and verse 7, the one we talked about last week, where he talked about the linen shorts that had become ruined. Spoiled. And they were good for nothing. And so you've got this pot that the potter is working with, it has become marred in some way, and so it's ruined. It's good for nothing. So he has to start over again. Now, that's the basic object lesson. It would be good just to kind of stop at that point and just ask the class, what are some of the lessons you're beginning to connect that Jeremiah is talking about between this potter and the clay, and how it relates to God and his people? Let them start wrestling with some of those questions, some of those answers. What is it that God is trying to get across with this object lesson? What are some of the lessons that came to your mind immediately as you just read those first 4 verses of Jeremiah 18?
Thankful that he reuses the clay and makes another pot. He doesn't just throw it away. It's not a lost cause. I just need to work a little bit differently with it. Yeah. With what seems right in his own eyes.
Yeah.
I may not be who I want to be or who I think I'm supposed to be, but if I allow God to work and do what he calls me to be.
Good. That even in God's work, in his sovereignty of being able to work as he sees fit, that he does so with mercy. He does so with grace in our lives. He doesn't immediately discard us. What else you notice?
When those videos that you were showing, when you start over, it was pretty, in regards to the play, it was pretty violent. I mean, he was forming it for a while, but then he really put all back and one up again. It's pretty extreme.
I didn't even notice that, but you're right. It seems he would so delicately make the pot as he's forming it, but when it became marred, he would just slap it back together with pretty violently to get it all packed back down into that ball shape.
He did what was needed to.
Before I have to have it many times.
The reforming.
I have to have it many times.
Okay.
That was, if you consider that one continuous video, which I know it wasn't, but you know, reform.
Yeah.
And God was willing to do that with his people over and over and over. He was willing to remake the pot, okay, but they didn't want to be remade.
So there is the fact that this marred clay, it could stay marred through several different attempts at making this pot. Whether it's got air bubbles, whether it's too wet, whatever it is, it takes some time for it to get to the right consistency where the potter can work with it. And it's an illustration of how he did work with Judah over and over and over again to try to get them to listen. Well, those lessons become very apparent, very obvious, but the language that God uses, read verses, somebody has it there, read verses 5, let's go 5 through 12.
Then the word of the Lord came to me, saying, O house of Israel, can I not do with you as this potter, says the Lord? Look, as the clay is in the potter's hand, so are you in my hand, O house of Israel. The instant I speak concerning a nation and concerning a kingdom, to pluck up, to pull down, and to destroy it, if that nation against whom I have spoken turns from its evil, I will relent of the disaster that I thought to bring upon it. And the instant I speak concerning a nation, concerning a kingdom, to build and to plant it, if it does evil in my sight, so that it does not obey my voice, then I will relent concerning the good which I said I would benefit it. Now therefore speak to the men of Judah and to the inhabitants of Jerusalem, saying, Thus says the Lord, Behold, I am fashioning a disaster and devising a plan against you. Return now every one from his evil way, and make your ways and doings good. And they said, this is hopeless. So we will walk according to our own plans, and we will every one obey the dictates of his evil heart.
Would you say the object lesson is about the clay, or is it about God?
Yes.
Some might pick one or the other, but God's got a message out there for both. Himself as the potter who is molding the clay, and about the clay, because the clay plays an important part in this object lesson. One of the things I notice about this lesson to begin with is that being a pliable, impressionable substance is important for us as human beings if we want to be useful in God's hands. If we're not moldable, if we're not pliable, there's not just a whole lot that God can do with us. And that's what we see in Judah later on, even in this object lesson. They have become hardened. They become such that God can't mold them, that he can't make it pliable. I'm reminded of Ephesians 2:10, we're God's handiwork, or some translations say God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. In 2 Corinthians 4:7, we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not us. But one of the things that some have looked at this story, looked at this object lesson, and really tried to grapple with it. In fact, the way that one person put it, here we have the true but mysterious blending of divine sovereignty and human responsibility. This working out of God's sovereignty and our responsibility in his sovereignty. And it shows that God is the master potter. He is the one who is at work in the lives and the affairs of mankind. And he maintains his sovereignty to mold us as he sees fit. In fact, that verse in verse 6, he says, can I not do with you, Israel, as this potter does, declares the Lord? Like clay in the hand of the potter, so are you in my hand. That's not the one I was. It's verse 4. It says, the pot that he was shaping from the clay was marred in his hand, so the potter formed it into another pot, shaping it as seemed best to him. What was the translation you were using, Mike? How did it put verse 4?
As it seemed best to him.
Okay.
And your notes you had, as it was right in his eyes to do.
But right in his eyes to do. I think it's just even more direct. God reshapes, he reforms, he molds the way that his sight for us sees it, the way that he wants it to be. So, what part does the clay part make in this? Does the clay have a choice? Does the clay, what is the clay's purpose in this?
It can fight back, but it needs to be submissive.
Yeah. God has a purpose for us. And we can either fight it, we can work against it, we can refuse to be shaped by him, or we can submit to his shaping in our lives, his molding in our lives. Are we willing to do that?
I'm sorry, I just noticed it said, can I know do?
Can I know do?
It's one job, three.
I missed it.
It's on your PowerPoint.
There were more slides than just this one, so it's not just one job. Can I no do with you? I actually think I put that in the outline first time that way too.
I see that.
I got a good spell check.
Dewey wrote these notes, because he knows what he wants to do.
I can do no do.
I should tell him this lesson. What will Dewey do with this mistake?
And then I'm reminded of Paul's words. Things I want to do, I don't do. And the things I don't want to do, those are things I keep on doing. Thank you for pointing out my failures. I'll try to do better next time. I'll try again, yes. So you caught the object lesson. Thank you very much. See, I intended to do that. That was not a mistake. Yeah, the nature of the clay is what makes the difference with what the potter can do with it. And until the clay is willing to be molded correctly, until the clay is ready to submit to God's forming, then the potter keeps trying over and over and over again, helping us to get it right.
This lesson really for for a person that's not a part, right? Not knowing how to work with clay. I've heard the arguments from Calvinists that this means that you have no power at all, period. You have no choice. Totally, God should doing what he wants to do. And you have no choice there. So I don't think that's how you say it.
Sure. God's the one that determines everything for you. But the fact that the clay can work against the potter takes away that argument, takes away that fatalism. The clay can fight it, or the clay can cooperate with the hands of the potter. And that's what the rest of the message brings out. Verse 7, if at any time I announce that a nation or kingdom is to be uprooted, torn down, and destroyed, and if that nation I warned repents of its evil, then I will relent and not inflict on it the disaster I have planned. And if at another time I announce that a nation or kingdom is to be built up and planted, and if it does evil in my sight and does not obey me, then I will reconsider the good I had intended for it. God is sovereign. And one of the things that Jeremiah points out, or that God points out through Jeremiah, is that God can and he will change the way he deals with a person or a group depending on the response given to the work in their lives. He says, I intended to bless you, but you turned away from me. You rebelled against me. Therefore, it changes my molding. In fact, I get the impression that well, let's go through verse 11 here. Now, therefore, say to the people of Judah, those living in Jerusalem, this is what the Lord says. Look, I am preparing a disaster for you. The word for preparing, Larry, the word you used whenever you were reading it said what?
Verse 11.
Verse 11.
Now therefore speak to the men of Judah and to the inhabitants of Jerusalem, saying, thus says the Lord, behold, I am fashioning a disaster and devising a plan against you. Return now every one from his evil way, and make your ways and your doings good.
Yeah, it says fashioning a disaster. The word that the NIV translates preparing a disaster for you, it's a play on words because it's the same word that's used for potter back at the beginning of the chapter. That God is forming this disaster like he formed the clay. I get the impression, and we've noticed this in other places in the Bible, and even other places in Jeremiah, we talked about this, that if God can't get our attention, if he couldn't get Judah's attention with his blessings, then he will mold them and try to shape them through his judgment and through his punishment. He still has a purpose for them. He still has something he wants them to do. And so if he can't do it one way, he'll do it a different way. It's up to them to decide how they're going to cooperate, whether they're going to cooperate or not. God still has a purpose for them. And so, because they're not pliable, he forms new plans. But he still offers them the opportunity to repent. There's always the opportunity for them to submit and respond well. But their response is predictable, as God has said all the way through Jeremiah. In fact, what do you make of verse 12? They will reply, It's no use. What is in that reply? God just told them, turn from your evil ways, each one of you, reform your ways and your actions. And they say, it's no use. What's in their response? What does it indicate about their hearts, about their attitudes, about what they've become?
Okay. It goes back to last week, pride.
This side of the table's having trouble with frogs in the turtles, so we have to stay over here. Just, you said they don't care. What is it specifically? What do they not care about?
We don't see that problem. We don't care about fixing.
Yeah.
We're going to be perfectly.
Because they continue by saying, we will continue with our own plans. Okay, we're not gonna allow you to shape us. We're just gonna continue to go down our path.
Just read it. If you were just to read the words, it's no use, then you might get the impression that what they're saying, you've heard some people say, this is the way God made me. It's no use. I can't help it.
It sounds hopeless.
Yeah. There's that hopelessness, that despair, that despondency.
Phrases, we don't trust you. You're telling me you're gonna do this, but whatever.
God's further explanation indicates more of that answer. I don't care. I'm not listening to you. You might as well not even try. See, what I hear God saying is, God, this is a waste of time and a waste of your breath. We're not interested in listening to you about this. And God knew that. He leaves it there so that those who are reading it later on might learn the lesson, not necessarily Judah. That they might be molded and shaped by what Judah did and what God is trying to get across. God's desire was always to try to form them and use them according to his purposes. And so he finishes up. You kind of go through verses 13 through the end of the chapter. And he starts out with some rhetorical questions. He says, verse 14, does the snow of Lebanon ever vanish from its rocky slopes? Do its cool waters from distant sources ever stop flowing? And the rhetorical answer, of course, is no, it never does that. And so he goes on to explain how Judah has gone against common sense, has gone against the way that the world works. They've forsaken him. They've forgotten him. They've turned to idols. They've turned to other gods. And it's remarkable at how they've turned against God. But at the end of his statement to them, verse 17, notice he says, like a wind from the east, I will scatter them before their enemies. I will show them my back and not my face in the day of their disaster. What does that remind you of? Does it remind you of something we read earlier in Jeremiah? Yeah, in chapter 2 and verse 17. That's what the people, chapter 2, verse 27. That's what they said to God. Or God described them this way. They have turned their backs toward me and not their face. It's a symbol of rejection. It's a symbol of disregard and disrespect.
That's what the Scots did.
I think you described that in chapter 2 and 17. Some of us were in here. Go ahead, Bruce. Explain that one to the group.
Well, there's a rumour that Scottish attire doesn't involve that loincloth thing. When they turn their back on you, they also bow to you as well. At the same time.
It's that symbol of disrespect, complete and utter disregard for a person. And God says, I'm not going to turn my back on you. I'm not going to turn my face towards you again. But some translations, it depends on, it seems like I had read, I didn't put this in the notes, but if you want, it's the Masoretic text, some of the ancient copies. What they actually read verse 17 to say is, I will look at your backs and not your faces in the day of disaster. The language of that is, you're going to be running from this disaster. I'm not going to be with you and stand with you against this. I'm going to be watching you from behind and watch you run and fall right into the disaster. It's a statement not so much of a disregard and a symbol of disrespect as much as it is a statement of letting go. Yeah. Of withdrawing his presence from him. Speaking of Scots, the Scottish preacher Alexander White used to say that the victorious Christian life was what he said, a series of new beginnings. How does this chapter illustrate that truth? The victorious Christian life is a series of new beginnings. And we've talked about it. It's that reshaping over and over again, being willing to work out his purposes in us. And if it doesn't work out right the first time, we'll try again. If it doesn't work out, we'll try again. As long as the clay remains moldable, as long as the clay remains pliable, then the potter is willing to work with the material in order to make that pot the way that he wants it to be made. So what does that tell us? Some of our folks, they find that hopelessness. There's just no hope for me. Look at all the stuff I've done. Look at the way that I've disappointed God. Look at all the failures that I've done. Some of our folks need to hear that hope, need to hear that truth. God's not finished with you yet, if you're willing to submit to his work in your life. So what other thoughts, lessons do you hear from this particular object lesson? Let's go to chapter 19. This next one has a very different message to it. It's a similar object lesson, but the outcome of it is very different. We have to kind of read this one in pieces, because unlike the other object lessons that we've read, God actually explains the object lesson before he does it. He gives the lesson before he actually does the object. Chapter 19, verse 1. This is what the Lord says: "Go and buy a clay jar from a potter. Take along some elders of the people and of the priests, and go out to the valley of Ben Hinnom, near the entrance of the potsherd gate. There proclaim the words I tell you." Okay. I have to get some definitions down here. Anybody else here know what a potsherd is? Yeah. It's the broken pieces of a pot, the shards of it. So the potsherd gate, apparently, we really don't know for sure where the potsherd gate might have been. It's also called the dung gate in some places. And dung really refers more to refuse, to garbage, to trash. It's similar to the language Paul used in Philippians 3, where he says, "I have all these things that I could be proud of, but I consider it rubbish. I consider it garbage." And some translations will say, "I consider it dung." The potsherd gate, given the location of the valley of Hinnom, was probably at the southern end of Jerusalem. That would have also probably been where the potter was, because the potsherd gate would be the place where the potters in the town would go and throw out their broken pots. And so the valley of Hinnom, or Topheth, as it was sometimes called, becomes this place where it became the garbage dump. It was landfill for the people of Jerusalem. Well, what else had happened with the valley of valley of Hinnom? Right. And he'll describe that here in a minute as well, mention it in his lesson as well. It was the place where whenever they sacrifice, whenever they turned to child sacrifice, they would go down into the valley of Hinnom, and that's where they did the child sacrifice. That's why it was named Topheth. Topheth also comes up in this passage. He says in verse 11, toward the end of it, they will bury the dead in Topheth until there is no more room. Topheth means fire or a fireplace. It also sounds like the Hebrew word for a shameful thing. And so it had become a defiled place. It had become a shameful place. And so that's part of the reason why God takes these people down to that place. Notice it's some of the specific and religious leaders of the community. They go down to this place that is a place of shame and embarrassment. They remember the history of that place. They remember what has happened to the place. And then you add to that the fact that it's the landfill, and so it is a bad, stinking, terrible place in order for an object lesson to take place. Verse 10, he says, then break, let's see, he's gone to the potter, and he buys this clay jar. And I just can imagine that it's a clay jar, just given the context of this, that it's possibly a clay jar that's had to be reformed a few times because it had been marred a few times. And so now he takes this clay jar, this finished product, and takes it down to give this message from the Lord. In verse 10, he says, break the jar while those who go with you are watching. And say to them, this is what the Lord Almighty says, I will smash this nation and this city, just as this potter's jar is smashed and cannot be repaired. So he goes down and he breaks the jar in front of them. The interesting thing is the breaking of a jar or a pot, a clay pot, has some cultural and some societal context. It is said that other nations did the same thing. The Assyrians, the Hittites, the Arameans, they would break jars to cast curses on their enemies and those who did not keep their treaties. In fact, Psalm 2 and verse 9, you go back and look how God uses that imagery, where he talks about having the Judah would have a scepter and he would smash his enemies to pieces. The Egyptians would write the names of their enemies on clay vessels and they would smash them in an effort to break their enemy's power. And in Leviticus, God told the people that defiled vessels should be shattered. So any of those explanations, any of those symbols about breaking this clay jar would apply, wouldn't it? Judah had broken its covenant with God. They break the jar. They had become enemies of God. God breaks this jar just like he's going to break their power. They become defiled. And as such, they needed to be shattered. And God says, I'm going to smash them. This place of Ben Hinnom, we've noticed about that. We talked about this back when we talked about chapter 2, because the Greek word Gehenna, our word hell comes from, it comes from the Greek, the Hebrew, and I don't know how to pronounce it, Hinnom. It's the valley of Hinnom. This is the place because of the burning fires, the child sacrifice. They say the smoldering fires. It is said that the fires never went out. You could always see the glow of the fires in this valley. And it became as kind of an illustration or a visual representation of what hell must be like because of the difficulty of this. So what are the lessons? What is it that he's wanting his people to understand? He says, I'm going to smash you. I'm going to smash you as a nation. Just as this potter's jar is smashed and cannot be replaced. This lesson kind of flies against the earlier one, doesn't it?
It's while the clay was still soft and moldable, but was able to do something with it. Once it hardened, that's it.
What does that tell us?
Go back to hardened hearts.
Yeah. But there comes a point where a person's heart is not moldable by God anymore. And so he finally says, enough is enough. I can't do anything with you. That is a frightening thought. How does a person know? Because I've heard people really worry about this. What if my heart is so hard that God can't work with me? What if I become one of these stiff-necked people that God talks about? Can God still use me? How would you answer that?
The fact that you worry about it, but you're not there yet. It's when you get to the point where you don't care. And you have no desire to change or repent or anything.
It's when you give the answer that Judah did to God in that previous object lesson. God, you're wasting your breath. You're wasting your time. I'm going to do it my way. Thank you very much. You can move along to somebody else now.
And that's why I like Romans 7, because I think that's Paul. When Paul is explaining his struggle there, I think that's a positive thing. I know I'm doing wrong, but I don't want to. I'm trying to do what's right. I'm not always perfect. I'm going to mess up. But I keep striving for what is right. That's thank God for Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
But when you don't have that struggle, when you do wrong and you don't care.
That first object lesson was that constant, His grace, His mercy. I'm going to keep working on it. I'm going to keep working with Him. I'm going to keep working with you. I want to keep fashioning you for my purposes. I'm going to keep making you what you need to be to accomplish my purposes for you. And as long as a person is moldable, as long as a person is submissive to God's word, that promise is there. In this case, notice what God charges them with. Verses 4 and 5. Like I said, this is one where he makes the explanation before he ever gets to the object lesson. In verse 3, he says, hear the word of the Lord, you kings of Judah and people of Jerusalem. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Listen, I'm going to bring a disaster on this place that will make the ears of everyone who hears of it tingle. And then here are the charges. For they have forsaken me, that's number 1, and made this a place of foreign gods, number 2. Now he's talking about the place of Ben Hinnom. That's the valley where they're specifically standing in, that they've opened up and looked at. But he's also talking about Jerusalem and the temple, of course, from the previous things that we've read. Number 3, they burned incense in it to gods that neither they nor their ancestors nor the kings of Judah ever knew. Number 4, they had filled this place with the blood of the innocent. Then number 5, they built the high places to Baal to burn their children in the fire as offerings to Baal, something I did not command or mention, nor did it enter my mind. Those are the behaviors of someone that have turned their back on God. They turned all their affection, all of their trust, all of their glory that they will give to other gods. And so he talks about how this, notice in this valley, in this place, verse 7, I will ruin the plans of Judah and Jerusalem. I will make them fall by the sword before their enemies, at the hands of those who want to kill them. I'll give their carcasses as food to the birds and the wild animals. I will devastate this city and make it an object of horror and scorn. All who pass by will be appalled and will scoff because of all its wounds. I will make them eat the flesh of their sons and daughters, and they will eat one another's flesh because their enemies will press the siege so hard against them to destroy them. Verse 11, this is what the Lord Almighty says. I will smash this nation and this city, just as the potter's jar is smashed and cannot be repaired. They will bury the dead in Topheth until there's no more room. This is what I will do to this place, to those who live here, declares the Lord. I will make this city like Topheth. The houses in Jerusalem and those of the kings of Judah will be defiled like this place, Topheth. All the houses where they burned incense on the roofs to all the starry host and poured out drink offerings to other gods. He's going to defile them just like they defiled that place because of their disrespect or disregard, their rebellion against God. I lost the spot. Where am I looking for? Lost it. Here it is. I missed it. Verse 6. It says, beware, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when people will no longer call this place Topheth or the valley of Ben Hinnom, but the valley of slaughter. God renames this place. What's the significance of renaming this place? It's more than just descriptive. When names were changed in the Old Testament, they were changed to indicate a change in purpose, a change in direction. That's right.
Puts it out of the valley of God's, puts it into the valley of God's what, God's want, God's will,
Yeah. God's judgment.
God's judgment. It's no longer a valley where they honor God.
It's a valley now that God accomplishes his purposes to bring judgment and punishment on his people. Changes his direction. So agree or disagree? God can mold a person as many times as necessary until the human heart responds in willful apostasy and refuses God's efforts. Is that really possible? That God can mold a person as many times as necessary.
I think I'd rather be an unfinished pot than finished article. Finished, you finished. You can only be broken. So I think the best way to be is tell like Philippians 1:6, he who started a good work in you promises on that day brings completion.
Yeah. It's a statement from Paul in Philippians 3. I haven't obtained all this. I hadn't gotten there myself, but one thing I do, I keep pressing on. For that which God first took hold of me, what Christ first took hold of me. The language of the potter's hands again. So the end of the lesson is this. And it's just to ask, which of these lessons has meant the most to you? That God is sovereign and absolute. Men before God are like clay in the potter's hand. Man can no more attain a worthy end in life without submitting to God than clay can become a shapely vessel without the potter. The result of human free will parallels the spoiled clay in the potter's hand. As the potter reshaped the spoiled clay into another vessel, God seeks to fulfill his purpose even after human failure. I think that's one of the ones for me in this lesson that is so valuable, so powerful, that in spite of human failure, God can still work with us. God can still mold us. God can still use us. God's not finished with us yet. As long as we turn to him, we look up and we submit to his work in our lives.
I think it's also, but even if it's not failure, God's still not finished with us. God still continues to mold us into something better than what he seeks us to do.
That's right. It doesn't matter what age you are. It doesn't matter what circumstances in life you find yourself in.
Very revealing about the nature of God. It's the whole two chapters. A lot of people think God's very painful.
So that's as long as we keep ourselves vulnerable.
Right.
Once we know it. As we said, that's it, God.
And you see, that hardening can come a couple of different ways, can't it? It can come from in our lives, it can come from this total disregard of God's ways and God's efforts in our lives, where we say, I'm going to do it my own way, God. I don't trust you. I don't believe you. I know what you say, but It's always that but that always gets us in trouble. But it can also come from the form of, God, I appreciate the fact that you have molded me to perfection now. I know everything I need to know. I'm doing everything I need to do. It's that person who feels like they have arrived. Unlike what Paul says, I'm still pressing on. I'm still trying to become what Jesus Christ has taken hold of me for. It's the person that says, I don't have anything else to learn. I've got it.
I think a lot of this too is just relating to today's mindset of what we live in this world is faithless. And I think that if you look, to me, listen to everybody and what this is really come down to faith. Jesus asked for faith to believe. God just asked them, these people have lost all their faith in God. They've turned to where I can do this. I've pressed forward. I've done this. I've done whatever way you want to put it in. And I think we get to that point sometimes, and I do it in my life, is where I might refer to Philippians. I might refer to Paul. I might refer to all this that, I am going the right direction, but hold on. Where's my faith? And faith brings hope. These people have no hope because they've lost that faith. Yeah. And I think the faithlessness is where I think the key in some of this that I kind of pushed in our class is that, where are we putting our stock? Where are we putting our every morning we're getting up, every evening we're going to bed, what things in our life that matter for the matter of having faith in God that He could mold. What's fascinating about the play to me is that you could take an older person that's gone through so many things in their life and they could be molded into a vessel of beauty, as well as someone that's young that can be molded through their life to something beautiful. And to me, that's hope. It's hope for what could be and will be done, that if only I allow myself to be that way and put myself in a position to work, mold me the way you want to. I'm not in control. You are. Here I am. Send me. Here I am. Where do I go? So I really think faith is really the key.
It's that realization and that acknowledgement that God is wiser than I am. His ways are higher than my ways. I may think what's best for me. I may think I know what my purpose is to be, but God may have a different purpose. God may have a different idea for the direction of my life. Who am I going to listen to? My own smarts, my own feelings, or am I going to listen to God and allow Him to direct my steps?
It's almost kind of like, just as foolish as them taking wood or stone and forming it into something and calling it God and praying to it. This is kind of like a lump of clay trying to form itself into something useful.
Mm-hmm.
We're not the potter. We're the clay.
And that's
You
just,
can read into the passage.
that's right. And that's just really ridiculous to think too, isn't it? That the clay can actually sit there and mold itself.
Or it could say to the potter, you didn't mold me.
That's
You
right.
didn't do that.
Yeah. Or you got this all wrong.
You may be wrong.
Yeah. This is the way you made me. What am I going to do about it now? So even in this last one, there are these statements of hope that a person can change from rebellion and follow God, and he will change from wrath and punishment to forgiveness and heavenly fellowship. There is the possibility that after you've been rebelling against God, that you can come back to Him. You can make yourself moldable again. That's part of his explanation of this object lesson.
The whole purpose of the book of John.
The whole purpose of the book of Jonah. Yeah. What other example do you need than the people of Nineveh? They were as rotten and rebellious as you could come. Unfortunately, where Judah was, they had gotten to the point where God had given them blessings. They had been obedient at one point, but they changed from obedience to rebellion. And so God changed from fatherhood and fellowship to sending punishment and wrath. The other is also possible. And that, again, that's where Judah had found itself, and the pot was just about to be smashed. Where do I find myself? That is the application of the lesson here. Again, as John Wooden, I didn't spell his name right the second time. I knew a Wooden, but it's not that one here. I got two typos. Thank you for pointing them out. Failure isn't fatal, but failure to change might be. So what will that mean for you this week? As you make yourself available on the hand of the file. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.